Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. I'm a men's dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. And yeah, we've got this wonderful episode here. Something a bit different, I feel, something about food and our relationship to food. And I'm lucky to be joined by the wonderful Calum Stronach. He is an absolute expert in this field. He's a registered nutrition. He works with world-class athletes, elite world-class athletes, as well as everyday people, and really helping them shift their relationship to food, as well as working with people with disordered eating and eating disorders, which we get into explaining what the difference are between those two things in the episode as well. But we really get into why we eat, why do we go for food? Why do we, maybe binge on food? Why do we want chocolate? Why do we want sweets? Why do we restrict ourselves from things? And how can we have a better relationship with it? And Calum really takes you through a really beautiful process of how you can shift a relationship with, say for instance, sweets, right? Maybe you don't keep them in the house, for instance, because that way you don't eat them. Now, wouldn't you rather have a relationship with them that you can keep them in the house and then you just have them in the moments that you want them, maybe once a week or twice a week, but there's no guilt, there's no shame, you just choose to have them when you want to. So it really explains how you can get to a point with creating that sort of relationship that feels healthy and happy with food. And obviously we use sweets as an example, but that can be any food that you want to have a better relationship with. So we really get into the details, and I can't think of anyone better to talk to about this. I was lucky enough to be on Calum's podcast, the Not All Men podcast, and we had a really beautiful conversation about, the work that I do around dating and relationships and intimacy and connection. So I'm really happy to bring him to the podcast and get into his specialty, which is around, food really, and how we operate with food and nutrition, and he knows so much, and probably only scratched the surface really as well. We got into beliefs, how do our beliefs drive our food habits, our beliefs about ourselves, emotion, the emotions that drive us to eat, and how we can start to look at those more closely and create a better relationship with those emotions instead of using food. He talks a lot about something called diversifying the toolbox, which I think is a really important practice as well around food. So yeah, it's a tremendous episode. I really enjoyed recording him. He has a lovely manner and it's very easy to digest, and the sort of thing you might even want to pass on to somebody who just has, and it doesn't have to be that someone has an eating disorder, for them to have a tricky relationship with food. I see for myself, as sometimes I explain in the podcast, that I don't always have a great relationship to food. I will not keep certain things in the house, or I will guilt myself when I have some chocolate when I've really told myself I'm not going to. That is enough for us to groom ourselves into a better relationship with food. So I'm sure there's many people you can think of that would really benefit from this episode. We talk about some of the other ends of things where people who become, obsessed with things like clean eating. He talks about that phenomenon and why that happens and so forth. So it's an absolute treasure trove of episode, because food is something that we can't get away from. We have to eat. So, it's one of the relationships that you really want to bring into being healthy and functional, just for your own happiness and well-being. So without further ado, I'll let you get into the episode. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, back with another episode and a topic that I've never really spoken about. I probably haven't put as much thought to as I probably should have either. And today's guest is someone I spoke to on his podcast and had such a beautiful conversation that, flowed. I think the time just flew by when we spoke last time so wonderfully. We talked about, my side of what I do in relationships and dating. And this time it's his turn to sit back and relax and answer some questions and probably speak more than me. And today I'm joined by Calum Stronach. He is a wonderful man. Like, just his podcast, Not All Men, features some wonderful guests, but he also has a wonderful temperament, a way of interviewing. And he is a registered nutritionist that specialises in working with people who have disordered eating and eating disorders, which I'm sure it'd be really good to get into the difference of those, because I think most people only know about one of those. Hello, Calum. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely and wonderful to be on this side of the microphone, and obviously to connect with you again.
Yeah. It's after we spoke, I really started to look at your posts and read them, and I was just like, wow, yeah, there's so much to this eating thing, like especially for me, someone who had only really looked at food from a point of view of what do I enjoy, what do I like. What's not going to make me put on weight? What's going to make me lose weight? And what are my other thoughts? What am I trying to avoid currently is usually the things I'm thinking about in my head. But before we get into all that, a question I like to ask all my guests is, it's always beautiful to hear the journey that has been, their journey to come to do the work that they do today. So it'd be great to hear your journey.
Sure. So, I mean, from a personal point of view, I really struggled with my body weight when I was younger. I was significantly overweight. I was probably about 15 years old and 128 kilos. I had that really rewarded. I will just say that in the sense that I was a great rugby player, as you can imagine, being anywhere from 100 kilos plus. You are a child who is just walking along a pitch with kids hanging off him. And so it wasn't inherently necessarily a bad thing. I was still an athlete, but really engaged in poor, emotionally driven eating habits. And anyway, as my rugby career started to progress and things like that, I became more and more active. This is something that I'm sure we'll cover, but it had a lot of kind of, I suppose, restrictions placed on my nutrition. And when I say restrictions, it's just the natural environmental things where I was part of an environment and a club environment where I was eating with people as opposed to eating in secret. And I had a lot more external validation that then fueled some more positive habits. And so ironically, I then lost a lot of weight. The weight that I lost then caused me to lose my rugby contract. And they subsequently said, you can go and find another club, or you can come on as an intern. And I ended up doing an internship in nutrition, and that's then started me on this path of doing what I do now. I come from a performance background myself, and working in kind of performance sport, and still to this day I work in elite sport. With fortunate enough to work with everyone from just members of the general population in my kind of private practice, but then currently the lead practitioner of British weightlifting, and then have worked with other sporting governing bodies prior to the Tokyo Olympics, and then it's the run up to the Commonwealth Games at the moment. But I work in that space where there are performance nutritionists who say, this is what we should do, this is the ideal things that we could do. And I am essentially that person where I work with athletes and humans who kind of know what to do but are unable to implement it, or maybe engage in behaviors that are taking away from their lives. And some of these behaviors are normalized, like I'm feeling guilty around the consumption of food. Like, it's almost like an accepted thing these days, where we look at everything from that kind of spectrum, small patterns of guilt, through to huge, more kind of traditional things that we would know as clinical eating disorders, like more huge practices of restriction and overconsumption, binging behaviors, and the like. And so it's been a kind of a very much a personal journey, looking at my own disordered patterns of eating, particularly coming out of rugby myself, particularly then trying to qualify as a registered nutritionist as well, and being like, I am this guy who has a master's. Well, I didn't have a master's at the time, but who had an undergrad in nutrition and all the rest of it, but then I still can't implement this. And so working through my own kind of journey, and then also then helping other people to do the same.
That's interesting. That's incredibly interesting. Like the breadth of people that you're working with, from, you know, the average person who's just wandering down the street to pick up a pint of milk on a Saturday morning, to high performance athletes that we watch and see them in what we feel is the peak of physical condition.
I think it's still the sense of the way in which I kind of think about it is that, first and foremost, they're all humans. And then also I just work with people who have a high level of food focus, and I then just try and take and harness that focus into something positive that actually serves their life. And for some people, the kind of the purpose or serving their life is a medal at the Olympic Games. And for some people, what's serving their life and purpose is serving their kids. And it's just those high symptoms of food focus, and then taking that focus and using food as a vehicle to supplement our life, whether that's to nourish us physically, to give us the energy and vitality to make the most out of life, but then also emotionally, spiritually, to say that food is a driver of joy. It's a driver of connection. Like, we can literally enhance our connection and as a social experience through food. And so creating a much more expansive narrative, and for many reasons, this kind of the narrative around food, I think, has been more and more constricted and led to these kind of more binary narratives of food is fuel and other similar kind of messages, to the really just take away from how food can actually make our life so much better. And so it's whilst athletes and, like, say, the mums and dads that I work with are in different areas of what they're trying to aim for in, I suppose, their overall lives, it's still, there's a lot of common threads that kind of combine the two together.
Yeah. I guess food is such an emotive topic, you know, and I'm thinking of it's even a conversation I had on. Yeah, I did. If only I had a conversation with some guys that are in a folk jazz band, a West African folk jazz band, the Ballymire Project they're called. And we're talking about walking through the supermarket. This might make a bit of sense in a second. And I was saying how, you know, as an adult now, I walk through the supermarket and see certain foods, and it transports me back to childhood. And you know, I said, and I was like, yeah, you know, if I see corned beef, whenever I see a can of corned beef, right, it transports me back to childhood. And I remember my mum cooking corned beef and rice. In the corned beef is like onions and tomatoes and, you know, all sorts of things. But it's traditionally is kind of seen as one of the band members called it, struggle food. Like, you know, poor because it's cheap. And I was like, it always transports me back to a time that actually is quite happy. So I look at and I always see it and I smile. And I also completely understand how, you know, something like there's tripe also has an effect on me, because I really don't like it, but it also reminds me of my mother's ex-husband, who I didn't like very much. So it's like how these foods can have this emotional impact on us. And it's almost like sometimes we're trying to remove that, you know, and I can understand how you might want to remove one of those because it's a negative feeling you don't want to experience. But there's also food that has an incredibly uplifting experience, especially when we have it ourselves, but also share it with others.
Completely. And even if we look at, say, research that look at successful, what they call successful dieters, and it's a group of people who have success in maintaining their weight loss versus, or go on to have further success versus those that have that lose weight but then end up having a lapse within the first year. They're usually the determinants. And one of the key characteristics of successful dieters is that diversity in the reasons why they eat. And they will eat for nourishment, but they will also eat for comfort. They will also eat for joy. They will also eat to set an example to their kids. They'll also eat to, I ate something the other day because I didn't want to throw it away. Like, I ignored every hunger signal. I ignored any kind of principles around timing of what I should eat. I don't want to throw that away. And it's a valid reason to eat. Can I do that every single day? Probably not. But in the same way that if we're limiting the reasons why we're eating to purely just physiological nourishment, then we're missing a huge trip. We should be able to seek comfort in food, or, you know what, today's been a really long day and I just need some joy. What is joy? And food can be that vehicle. I always say to my brothers, because my nan made the best apple pie, and that's a real kind of like connection to my childhood. And I always say that you can tell when I'm in need of comfort because I'll bake an apple pie, and and absolutely we should. And if we can lean, like, food is the one thing, the one relationship that you cannot avoid. And if we can start to really embrace that idea and use it as a vehicle to travel the world through food, to seek that comfort through food, then it's beyond incredible kind of mechanism that it just enhances our lives. And thinking about what you do in terms of like enhancing people's relationships with themselves and relationships then with other people as well, we think about the strongest or the most intimate relationships have they meet a diverse range of needs in this, and not all needs, like we've discussed before. It's not on one person to meet every single one of your needs. However, if I was to go on a date with an individual, then I understand that, this woman she's really fun. So I know that I can lean into her for fun. This woman, and then I go on a second date and she's like, she actually mirrors my sense of adventure. I like that. And then we get to date number 3 or 4 and it's like, you show up and maybe you're a bit more vulnerable and you're like, how's your day been? And she's actually quite comforting. And so you've got this kind of fun, adventurous, comforting and things like that. And so on and so forth, as you then progress into the more relationship status, and you understand that this person actually fulfills a lot of magical needs. Food can do the same. Food should do the same. It should be that source of fun. It should be that source of just practicality. It should be a source of convenience. It should be easy. It should be a source of comfort and soothing. It should be a source of joy. And we miss a trick for sure. It's a hugely emotively driven thing that we cannot avoid.
And it sounds like, I know how beautiful food is and wonderful and joyful it can be. But then there's this other side that we kind of end up in. Well, not other side. It feels like a spectrum, this food relationship, isn't it? Because, as you said before, people get into this over functionalization, shall I call it, of food. That it's just a collection of nutrients and things that need to go into our body for fuel, where it's almost like we become disconnected from food on that side. And then there's the kind of other side where maybe all of our eating is driven by some emotion, whether that's we're conscious of or unconscious of. And I imagine that's where on this side where we get into the realm of eating disorders and disordered eating. What I think would be great to touch on before we go any further is the difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating. Disorganized eating. Disordered.
Say that last bit again.
It was disordered eating, right? Or
disordered eating. Yeah. So disordered eating is, I suppose, just general patterns of behaviors. Like eating disorders are clinical diagnoses of an actual conditions. And there is criteria which you would meet through displayed behaviors and even maybe some kind of physiological and physical metrics as well, that then can categorize you into eating disorders like anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorders is one of the most prevalent eating disorders at the moment. We've seen the rise of orthorexia, orthorexia being the obsession with clean eating. And so there's a set of physical parameters that kind of define those kind of illnesses, essentially. That's what they are, illnesses. Whereas disordered eating is just general behaviors that we might display, that a combination of those individual behaviors make up an eating disorder, but they're driven from slightly different places and they're not wholly present in a kind of an abundance that lead to eating disorders. And disordered eating are just general practices and behaviors or thought processes that take away from the quality of our lives. Like it's almost accepted that we should feel guilty around certain foods. Or if you're telling me that, oh, I don't keep chocolate in my house because I can't trust myself around it, you have work to do. Like we just accept that that's not normal. Like overconsumption of binging isn't normal. And so it's then it's important to make the kind of the diagnosis between the separation between the two, because there are certain things that we try and keep away from people with eating disorders, whereas disordered eating is just we can be much more diverse in the way in which we approach things, and kind of address these and the treatment plans for that. So yeah.
Okay, important distinction there. And I'm interested. It's interesting. I don't know if you said it was an obsession with clean eating,
orthorexia,
the obsession with clean eating and the rise of that, because I come from, I was probably training in the gym probably 3 or 4 times a week for the best part of 10 years. I was in a big meathead gym in East London. There were guys who were professionals and all sorts. And there was definitely a time in my life where, and I could, 3 of my ex-girlfriends can probably testify to this. Sometimes I look back and you feel sorry for the girlfriends you had where, I'd only eat certain foods. Everything was going into MyFitnessPal. It was being watched. I maybe wasn't so obsessed about nutrients and stuff, but I was like calorie counting, the whole thing. And the effect was I was just really like, okay, chicken. Okay, is it being grilled? Nope, not eating it. It's fried. Nope, not touching it. Like I was really disciplined. I looked at it as being disciplined, but I can definitely see there's a verge of obsession with clean eating. I've definitely sat down and had dinner with people who had an obsession with clean eating, because I remember going to a few very nice restaurants and them having to basically explain exactly how the particular meals needed to be cooked or they wouldn't eat them. But I see this is probably on the rise because of the increased obsession we have with how our bodies need to look, how they need to operate, the kind of rise of gym culture, I guess, because when I look back almost 20 years ago now, when I first went to the gym, like there wasn't really a culture for going to the gym. People thought I was weird. Like, why are you going to the gym? And I was like, well, At the time, I started going to gym because I'd broken up with a girlfriend and I just needed something to do. But there's a real culture now of gym. You know, there's all these, you know, beautiful gyms are opening, and there's an obsession both on male and female side around how the body has to look and what we can put into our bodies. So I can imagine that whole culture is really normalized the obsession with clean eating.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, there's a couple of things. So I think there was a study that came out that said 90% of teen boys exercise with the intention of bulking up. And you said some key things in there, which I think is really, really important to kind of look at. We're not here to and me as a practitioner, I do not demonize my fitness pal. I do not demonize education. I do not demonize even just this aspiration to be bigger, better, faster, stronger. And when you talk about, say, things like discipline is an act of self-love. I am doing something my future self will thank you for. But then the key thing to kind of evaluate is to look at, well, what drives that? What's the actual intention behind that? Because the foundation of maybe some of the things that we're trying to do, okay, so particularly as men and societal narratives and that kind of sit around masculinity, we can often try to control our bodies in a sense to then feel accomplished, so that therefore we feel enough. And so is that obsession with say going to the gym and the gym culture, is that driven from a place of inadequacy, or is that driven from an actual act of love? Because it's the same, like, I love myself and I want my experience of this world to be like just amazing. And I know the more energy and the stronger and the more capable I am, the more experiences that I can facilitate, right? But then if I'm doing it as a sense of, like I say, driving, placing conditions on my love, then we need to look at that. And it's one of, I think, some of the problematic messaging on social media can be, as an example, where you see certain PTs and influencers, particularly in the fitness space, talking about, I go to the gym because I love myself. And well, love is unconditional, right? And so there's no conditional and unconditional love. There's just love, and it's unconditional. And if you're saying that you love yourself, but though it's only based upon the fact that you go to the gym 5 times a week, then that's not love. And so exploring and holding a mirror up to those kind of aspects are really, really important. And again, when it comes to the use of things like MyFitnessPal, and even just engaging in clean eating, like, I love vegetables. Like, to be health conscious in your practices is amazing, and I will advocate it. But again, what's that driven from? Because remember that we are certainty driven beings. We in order for us to feel safe, we need to feel that sense of certainty. Now, if we are in a place where we're using MyFitnessPal for that driver, that external driver of certainty, then like, we need to check that. And what I mean by that is, I want to be able to go to myself, how's my nutrition today? And I go inwards and I generate that sense of safety from, yeah, it's fine, and I can trust myself. Whereas actually, like, if I'm reliant on MyFitnessPal as an example, how's my nutrition today? MyFitnessPal says it's okay, therefore it is okay, and I feel safe. Then it's external to us, and that's problematic. And if we are only reliant on external means of feeling safe around our nutrition, another thing can be routines and frameworks around clean eating and food rules and stuff like that. They're all external means of validation and this sense of safety. And so it's not to demonize discipline. It's not to demonize the use of MyFitnessPal. It's not to demonize the consumption of vegetables. And I'm not here to say you go and have the pizza. I mean, pizza is fucking fantastic. Let's just say that. But then still, like, if it doesn't, if align with the values, I'm not here to say what you shouldn't eat, but just be prepared to hold up a mirror and say, why am I doing this? Can I can I generate that sense of safety for myself inwards? Because that's how, like, as an example, that's how one of the mechanisms behind binge eating. Say if this is a very superficial example and it's often deeper rooted than this, but as a superficial example, if I go into, say if I'm going to a restaurant and I am ingrained in that my fitness pal culture, and you know what? I just don't want to track, or there's something that I just don't know how to track this. I order this plate of food and I'm like, oh, how the hell do I track that? And it creates some degree of uncertainty. And so we cannot sit as human beings, we cannot sit with that uncertainty, or at least not very well. So we need to then generate that sense of safety. And so how do we do that? We can go inwards and just say, no, we're good. This is fine. We can enjoy this. We can connect with the experience. That's the ideal sense. But some people don't trust themselves to do that. And so what do? They go, fuck it. Because how can you be unsafe if there's no rules on food? How can you be unsafe in this moment if we expand the rules of your perceived rules of food to the spectrum that you are? And so it's looking at these kind of ways in which we engage in safety-seeking behaviors, restriction again being one of them. So I don't trust myself around these foods, so therefore I'm going to go to the restaurant and specifically say, this is what I want to do. And can you cook it with no oil, and can you do this, and all of the rest of it? And they're just safety-seeking behaviors. And so again, it's just really important to look at how can we internally generate that sense of safety that then contributes to ultimately our relationship with food.
It's really interesting that it's safety we're looking for. You know, this I've been talking a lot about safety in various aspects of relating and stuff like that, but like we're still with food, we're seeking to feel safe. And what I'm hearing is almost like when we can go inward and go, let me use an example. During the week, I have my own personal rules. It's like I try not to eat any like sugary stuff and chocolate and stuff like that from Monday to Friday. That's kind of my loose rule. And then last night I was hungry and tired, and I saw there was some chocolate in the cupboard. And I was like, I picked up the chocolate and I was like, do I want the chocolate? And I was like, do you know what? One bit of chocolate is not going to kill me. It's okay to eat the chocolate. And I had the chocolate. But because I was able to in that moment generate and feel safe to eat the chocolate and feel like, oh, it's okay. But if I didn't have that safety and I didn't have a level of self-trust almost in that moment, I would then try and find an external reason to tell me that it's okay to have the chocolate, or it's okay not to have the chocolate, whatever. So maybe I would, maybe look at an app and go, okay, let me check how many calories there are in this one bit of chocolate, or how much sugar is in this chocolate. Or maybe I'll go to my girlfriend and go, hey, like, I've eaten these things today. Should I have this chocolate? And all those things, it sounds like are doing is I'm outsourcing my sense of safety to something or someone else to tell me what's okay and what's not okay. So in the vein of that, the question I have is how do we learn this kind of self-trust with food? Because this is not a relationship that we're often taught very well, and we get so many so many conflicting messages about food and what's good and what's not good, that we almost get taught that in like so many other areas, that we shouldn't trust ourselves. We should trust the information and the science that's come to us to tell us this food is good at this time and it's not good at that time. So how do we develop that kind of trust of going, okay, in this moment, is this thing good for me? Is this what I want to do?
So the macro sense is by listening to your body. Because if we look at if we look at why we are driven to practices of restriction or binge eating, in particular at the kind of the extreme ends of the continuum, they are safety seeking behaviors. And what that essentially is a distrust and a disconnect with our body to that gives the message to your body, that your body's giving the message to you rather, I don't trust you to meet my needs. You're not listening to me. And so I'm going to ensure that my needs are met. And so as an example, maybe it is from a physical point of view. I don't trust you to physiologically nourish me in the way that I want. So I'm going to make sure that you binge in order for me to do that. And another way is you're not meeting my needs emotionally. I don't trust you're experiencing this degree of anxiety, and I don't trust you to navigate that anxiety. I don't trust you to regulate that. I don't trust you to be a beacon of safety and love while I experience that anxiety. So I'm going to drive you to a binge, and so that you escape that, and we eat some foods that give me dopamine and things like that. And so we have to, in a very kind of, I suppose, a more inverted commas woo-woo way, we need to listen. The body has the answers, and we need to be prepared to begin to just take in and say, no, like the answers to then managing overconsumption of food and restriction of food is just to create a pact with your body and say, I'm listening. I'm here to meet your needs. I'm here to nourish you. I'm here to give you joy. What you tell me what you need, and I'm going to listen. And that sounds like, well, how do we do that? And that is a very, very difficult thing, particularly as men, if we've lived a kind of an existence of repression, if we've lived an existence of not really connecting with emotion. And so there are kind of patterns where we have to be able to just kind of engage in, and just know that it's a systematic process. So the first thing is just to evaluate, what are we tolerating here, and what are the behaviors that, okay, no more, we're not tolerating that. Like I don't trust so like by me not having chocolate in the cupboard, I'm reinforcing that message to my body is like, you don't trust me. Well, I don't trust myself either. And so with no more. And we have to be prepared to practice it. And thinking about, okay, if we are going to engage in learning of new behaviors, there's two things that have to kind of take place for effective learning to take place. And that is outside of your comfort zone. So you're exposed to something new, or like it's uncomfortable in some way, and there has to be safety present. If the two don't coexist, then you do not have an effective learning environment. Thinking about our best teachers at school, they exposed us to new information, but made us feel safe in the environment that we're in. And so we can facilitate that for ourselves. So if I'm saying to you, you don't trust yourself around chocolate, say, and I'm saying you need to build a relationship with chocolate, then we have to engage in some form like exposure. The only way you build a relationship is through proximity. So we then have to think, okay, but I do not want to go through that. And so the first thing that we have to then, this is outside of all the narratives of exploring, well, what are we actually doing here? Like I said, what is our body representative of? What is food representative of? Like I say, my body is a symbol of achievement, which is why I obtained love, as how I attained love as a child, as an example, and all of these different modeling from our childhood and all the rest of it. But then bringing it very much into present day practices, we can say having some exposure to chocolate is like, particularly if we fear it, is a good thing. But if without creating that overwhelm, and so that we feel a sense of safety, we just say, okay, so we create parameters around it. You are going to have chocolate every day. You are like the quickest way to build a relationship is through proximity. And so, okay, wow, that's a lot. So the first thing is that we are going to be in a sense of creating kind of small controls around that. So we eat it every day, but we buy the multi-pack. So it's a pre-portioned, calorie controlled means of exposure to chocolate. And then once we do that and we kind of nail that, then we then say, you still have it every day because you haven't earned the right to not do yet. And then you buy the big bars. And then you have a pre-agreed portion, like 40 grams, 50 grams, say, that we go and work through that. And then we say, okay, well, now you have it every day, but start to listen. How much do you want? Do you want 1 square or do you want 2 rows? And we start to then say, okay, and then we say, you don't have to have it every day, and start to listen whether you actually need it and want it, et cetera, and then creating other parameters around, like practices around mindful eating and things like that. So mindful eating is a massive spectrum of the nutrition space, which you can engage in a plethora of different ways. But the main non-negotiables are not being perfect, but where possible, eating without distraction. And the other kind of parameter that I like to do is that when something is in your mouth, nothing is in your hands. Simple. And they're my 2 non-negotiables. So if I'm eating chocolate and I put it in my mouth, I put the rest on the table. So I'm not kind of like, it's creating a more mindful experience. And again, there's all of these different tasks. And I spoke before about kind of successful dieters engaging in a diverse intentions around why they eat. This is evidence proven. So let's be more conscious in the way that we do that. I give some of my clients, I write down a massive list. I've got a list of about 20 different reasons why we might eat, to, like I say, from joy to nourishment, to ensure I'm adequately fueled for my gym session tomorrow, to set an example for my family. I eat now, so I'm not as hungry later. So I eat less later, as an example. And just go and try and tick off as many as possible. Expose yourself to these different things. You don't know what you don't know. And be prepared to get it wrong. Be prepared to practice. Be prepared, like a relationship with a partner. You do not get through the early stages of a relationship without pissing her off. And again, it's the same thing with food as well. It's the same thing with, there may be times where you might just get it wrong. And it may be I'm saying that you're going to have a controlled portion of chocolate, and you may just have 2 of those controlled portions of chocolate one night. But that's okay. That's fine. We show up again tomorrow. We don't just piss our partners off and then, well, maybe some people do, and that's why it's problematic. But then we don't piss our partners off and then leave. And it's the same with these things. We just we give that our space, give ourselves that space for compassion, and we show up again and show up again. And that's how we evolve our relationship with food, is that kind of it constantly being. We talk about this idea of being in action, and the more we reinforce these narratives of like avoiding chocolate or avoiding these things, then your body is already in a place where it's like, I don't trust you. And you're just being like, yeah, I don't trust me too. And so we have to say no more. And so being in action is the most crucial part of that.
So much in that. It's like, I loved how there's the creating a relationship with the chocolate. And I'm using chocolate because I think a lot of us have, we have some form of relationship with chocolate in some way. It's that sugary goodness that we've been so weaned onto. But I love how it's like, we buy pre-portions, so we have every day. So we have the experience of what it's like to have every day. And then we change that experience slightly. And then we move into, it's almost like a conscious choice, because we're not afraid of having it every day because we've had that experience. And we have a level of discipline with ourselves around that. So then we're consciously choosing, like, hey, how much do we want to have? And it really shifts the relationship from this kind of push-pull of, I shouldn't have you, you're bad, oh, but I want you, now I'm bad, oh, I don't want you because you're bad, and actually create it in a way that it's like, okay, I'm in control and choice of this. I can be with this if I want to or not. And it's okay if I mess up and fuck up as well, and maybe gorge one day. That's also okay, because there might be a reason behind that I can look at. I might have been feeling a certain way that I can now have awareness of and I can look into.
Part of the thing where on my journey is I can remember being in a session with a practitioner, and he said to me, and bear in mind, I was a guy in my early 20s at this point, I think. And he said to me, Calum, I just want you to be comfortable with the idea of binging. And I was like, at that point, particularly as a more hot-headed young man, I wanted to be like, I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is the thing that robs me of so much joy in my life and creates so much misery in my life. And you're telling me that you want me to be okay with it? And there was an actual kind of like, in a roundabout way, there was an actual truth in that, in the sense that maybe to like a slightly more voluminous day of food is okay because it's what we needed. And I think about, say, myself, particularly as my own modeling and of my childhood and experiencing certain traumas and things like that. And particularly, I said I was a bigger kid because food would be the coping mechanism. And I can remember an experience where I must have been about 16 at the time. And obviously you're really aware. I mean, I had a wonderful girlfriend at the time. And but still, like, I had this attachment to being and looking a certain way and all the rest of it, and particularly because I was the most successful athlete in the school, but then my body didn't necessarily align with that and all of these kind of things. I remember having experience in the shower where I was just stood with my head against the wall being like, why can I not do this? And I remember it so vividly, of just beating myself up so much. But then what I think about is, like, there is a boy who experienced so much of a lack of safety, like elements of trauma and abandonment and other things like that. And a part of me just goes, well, thank fuck that he did binge. Because imagine if you have a child who is so void of safety and experiences so much uncertainty. A child can't sit in that. Really can't. They don't have the patterns to emotionally regulate themselves in that. And so I got lucky. Like, I got lucky in the fact that my crutch was food, whereas it could have been so much worse. It could have been more like drugs and alcohol and all these things that we escape into to regulate our emotions. And so a part of me is like, thank God that I did binge. And so I had to then say, okay, like, thank you for looking after me. Thank you for soothing me. And now it's time for me to take over. I got this. Like, I can keep us safe now. I have greater tools of like we don't really know what compassion is as children. Like, we all we understand is that pain generates a sense of urgency. I revise better when 2 days before the exam because I'm shit scared of how the exam's going to turn out if I don't do that. And so, like, part of my process was like, how can I trust myself to engage in these behaviors like the gym and my sport performance and all of these kind of things that brought so much success, achievement, and also joy and connection into my life? Can I trust myself to engage in these if I actually like what I see in the mirror? And having these kind of acknowledgements is so important. And saying, okay, I got this. I can manage these things. I can keep these beacon. I can make myself this beacon of safety, and understanding that it's driven from. It's one of the things that, like, when people come to me, they're like, okay, I have an issue with food. I'm like, we don't have an issue with food. No one has an issue with food. We have an emotional regulation problem. And And so we don't need to put food on this pedestal. You do not have an issue with your body. You have an emotional regulation problem. And so we just need to look at it in that sense. And so, because we think about it, particularly because, say, if we have an alcoholic, the part of the 12-step program is to remove alcohol from our existence, whereas we cannot do that with food. And thus, we do not have a problem with food. It's so important that we do not pedestal it in that, and kind of actually apply the principles to the right, and the interventions to the right thing, and understand what we're fueling. So yeah.
It's really, looking at our problems from looking at air quotes food problems, actually, from what's underneath it, which is, as you said, a problem there to regulate our emotion, in the same way that people who use drugs or who use alcohol or even use exercise as a way to regulate their emotions. Like, I can definitely see, it's funny when you were talking, I talk for myself, that I see how when I'm tired and I feel frustrated, I feel stupid, or any of these things, with like, in my common day, the number of times I feel frustrated, or I'm like, oh my God, I want to distract myself from something I'm doing. Maybe I give a really good example. Maybe there's something someone resonates with. I'm currently doing an 8-week program for men, and I find it really uncomfortable to write the program for some reason. And I did sit down with a pen and pad one day and looked into what it was, the motion there. And for anyone, it actually is that I feel like I don't know anything, and I'm a fraud, and I don't know enough to write. So it's like I'm uncomfortable with that feeling. And I found myself keep walking to the kitchen. I keep going to the kitchen, get up from this chair, walk into the kitchen, look in the cupboard, look in the cupboard, look in the fridge, look in the fruit bowl. And it was like this thing that I kept doing, even though I'd done it like 20 minutes before, right? I continually look to food to give me a sense of comfort, because I'm like, I know what you are, and you're going to make me feel nice, to get rid of this feeling that I don't like. And it's only when there was a moment when I was walking to the kitchen, and I was like, in my head, I was like, you know what you're doing? You're walking in there because you're uncomfortable with the feeling you're feeling, but you don't want to acknowledge the feeling that you're feeling. So I opened the fridge and I looked at everything for like the 5th time. And I came back and sat down on my chair, and I closed my laptop and I opened up my pad. And I was just like, what am I feeling right now? And I was like, I'm feeling like I'm a fraud. Like, I can't teach these guys anything. I'm feeling like inadequate, unsure of myself, unconfident, and all these things. And when I kind of said, okay, cool, I looked at those, and then I kind of looked at them, and I stopped for a moment. You know what I actually did then? I went to my podcast stats page, and I read through, and I had a look at the stats, and was like, whatever, again, like 3,000 plus downloads a month now, which is really nice. And then I've got a folder on my phone, which is messages I've got from coaching clients, or people who listen to the podcast, or people who follow me on Instagram, just saying feedback, often really beautiful things that people have said. And I read through those. And then I put my pad back down, I opened my laptop, and I continued working. And it really, in that moment, I was like, great, I've used these tools. And yeah, it took me the 5th time or so to go to the kitchen. But it's like, I realized where my emotions were. And I kind of seeked a level of safety in reality and what I know to be true, to bring me back into a place of kind of feeling centered, so I can continue the work, or I would have just kept going into the kitchen.
It's so common. And then kind of being able to obviously hold that lens up, you're able to deal with the actual root of the problem, and to say that it is exactly whatever it is. Maybe it's a belief that, even though logically we might believe that, we might know this not to be true, but our nervous system has evidence that, like, for example, at school, the most popular kids are usually the most handsome or the most pretty. And so it almost attributes this idea that in order to obtain status, we need to look a certain way. And many societal narratives also reinforce that. I do appreciate that. But that's not how you generate true connection. That's not how we generate connection with each other. And so we can then get to the root of the story in the exact way that you did, and we can say, no, like, this is how we may have had this evidence before where we are less than in some way. We may have had this idea before, but this is not true in this moment. Like, this isn't true anymore. That belief served us, because that my negative belief about my body served a fantastic relationship with the gym. I was strong and amazing, but then similarly, like, that didn't serve me anymore. I've got better tools than that. And if I'm believing that it makes me more worthy of love, then I can be like, no. I don't do it. I'm worthy anyway. Or no. Like, I do not obtain, like, I don't formulate connection with you by being like, have you seen how good I'm looking today? And like, I do through just sharing and listening and vulnerability and all of these things that we can't quantify. But then we try and then make the untangible tangible. And the easiest things to do is to apply this to our body. We can project our emotions onto our body, because I can literally pinch the body fat that I don't like about myself. Or I can literally tell you the exact behaviors that have contributed to that body fat sitting on my abdomen or my arms or whatever. And so it creates that greater sense of certainty. And then it's just stripping that back and saying, no, what am I feeling here? And what's the truth in that moment, in that wonderful example that you just gave?
Yeah, because it's really interesting for me, because also many years ago, I was just like, gym, six pack, big arms, I has that kind of whole rhetoric. And one day I walked into the gym. I'd been traveling for a couple of years, and I started a new job, and I walked into this gym and I was like, I'm going to do chest today. So I was like on the bench press, put some 20s on each side. And then I sat up and I looked around the gym. And I just looked around the gym and I was just looking at everybody. And there was this moment of like, I'm not here for the same reason everyone else is. Everyone else is in this gym because they want to look good to the people in this gym, just so they get some validation in life. And it really hit me, because I looked around at the outfits that people were wearing. And I was just like in an old t-shirt and a pair of shorts. And I was like, but you people, you've got outfits on here to impress the people in the gym. And I was like, I don't need to come here anymore. And I've never trained in a gym since that day, actually. A friend of mine, like a good friend of mine, owns a gym in East London. Wonderful gym. And I've been to his gym and it's lovely. I just hang out there. And he's like, you don't want to train? I was like, I don't resonate with this anymore as a thing to do, because I realized that how I looked didn't need to be dictated by what other people felt was good and not good. How I looked was dictated about how I felt about me. And, where I am now is I've probably lost quite a bit of muscle, which I'm totally happy about, because it means I can wear a wider range of clothes. Yep. The only kind of rule I put on myself in this is more so because I can fall into kind of just like sugary foods, especially, and I'd love to pick your brain about the sugary foods. I'm sure the listeners would be useful for them, but also useful for me, is I can just fall into like habits of like being like sweets and chocolate and eating loads. And the way I'm able to measure that is I just look at my stomach. It's one of the best places I can look and go, have I gone a bit too far with the bread and the wonderful cakes that I can find at the shop on the corner and chocolate? Or have I been doing enough yoga and exercise? I kind of just look down and go, okay, yeah, am I feeling like I've got some sort of sugar hangover? Yeah, okay, that means let's take a few days off. Because that's how I regulate myself and say, there's a certain condition I want to stay in, just for my own personal and practical reasons of not having to buy new clothes as well is also part of the reason. But it's this way of kind of self-governing, because it's, as you said today, it's like there's a lot of outside validation that we're seeking through our eating and our body. And that creates a lot of dysfunctional patterns in the way that we that we are, especially, and also emotional patterns we are. So I'm going to ask you about sugar, because I think I remember a time, and I think I might have been a kid, and I remember being told by a teacher that you need to have a certain amount of sugar every day. And I must have been pretty young when that happened. But I remember hearing that. And obviously things have changed, and sugar has definitely been something that we've demonized over the last, I feel like definitely the last kind of 10, 15, 20 years. But it's something that just calls you so much to eat. I don't know everyone else, but I just know with me, when I see a pack of Haribo, there's a part of my body that just goes into feeling lots of happiness and joy. And the problem is that when I buy the packet, I'm very quick to eat the whole packet at once as well.
So the first thing is looking at sugar for what it is. It's not addictive. It is a driver of dopamine, which we enjoy, but then, and sugar also comes in many different types of foods. It comes in, yes, things that we might think of like cakes and chocolate and sweets, etc., but it's also part of fruit and even just in terms of just carbohydrates being converted to glucose, and which is obviously a byproduct. And then even if we eat excess levels of protein, then that can also be converted to glucose too. Now, in terms of then thinking about even just what you were saying before about kind of the parameters that you're putting on in and around chocolate. I don't eat chocolate 5 times during the week, and then even holding this kind of like I should and I shouldn't narrative. And it's then putting in place like, well, how much are you kind of just reinforcing those ideas of I completely surrender to the idea that my body knows the way. And an example of this is you've kind of alluded to this, but if we get to Christmas as an example, where I have 23rd, it's like, oh, the mince pies are out. And then I proceed to just consume a vat of white food and chocolate. And then by the time you get to the 27th and 28th, your body is like, give me vegetables. Your body knows the way. But then what gets in the way of that? And there's a couple of things that I was thinking of as you were saying that. So first things as in terms of just like the management of those cravings, as human beings, we can't comprehend the negative. It's impossible. If we say, don't think of Boris Johnson in a mankini, like, you're welcome, right? And within that, then there was a study that looked at 2 groups of individuals that had access to these room full of activities, and it was the same. It was the same activities in one room, and one group had the freedom to just spend a certain allotted amount of time and just engage in the activities, and they monitored how they engaged in the activities, and etc. Whereas the other group was told to go into this room, exact same activities, but they were given one instruction: don't press the red button. And their urge to press the red button increased by a minimum of 12-fold, just because of the belief that they shouldn't do something. They shouldn't press the red button. And it went all the way up to 20-fold, by the way. So you're telling yourself that this idea of I should and shouldn't do this, you're giving yourself you're 12 times more likely to have a heightened urge to have this food, which then reinforces that disconnect with the body, right? And then if we're denying ourselves of this food, what we've then got to ask ourselves is, remember that everything we do, every action is a vehicle for a purpose. So if I'm binging because I want safety. If I'm exercising, why am I exercising? Maybe it is for great reasons, but maybe it's not. And so if we're craving and being driven towards these foods, what are we actually looking for here? And so by saying, I don't give myself permission to have these foods on a certain day, Like, why is a takeaway different on a Saturday than a Tuesday? Like, really, does your body actually absorb it any differently? No. And so, and okay, I hear that there's practical reasons, and maybe you're able to be more present with food, that you're more likely to enjoy it, etc., etc. But it's when we create these boundaries, we're making life more difficult for ourselves, and we're then further reinforcing that disconnect with self. Whereas we then think, so if I am in a process where, like, because you can tell when, if you actually connect, you can tell when you're actually hungry or not. You're like, there's a physical pang in your stomach if you actually begin to listen and differentiate. And so therefore I can acknowledge, you know what, like, I'm okay to like, I don't feel that hungry, but I'm being driven towards this sugar. And so therefore we go, well, what do I want? I want dopamine, is essentially probably what it is. I want, and so you're looking for pleasure and reward, essentially. Maybe you've had a hard day and you've really served whatever job that you're going in. It's like, oh, you know what? Like, I need some pleasure and reward, which is the chemical dopamine. And who are you to deny yourself of that? Like, does food have to be the vehicle for that? No. Does that align with your values? Maybe sometimes. But then just acknowledging and being like, okay, I'm listening. You're saying that I should maybe have some sugar. And so that means you are saying that you're looking for some form of pleasure. How else can I have some pleasure? And so just we then have to think about diversifying our toolbox. We have to think about, like, dopamine often comes from expression of creativity. It comes from music. It comes from learning something new. It comes from, it comes from a whole bunch of different, like, maybe even things like masturbation and all of these kind of things. The world is your oyster, right? And I love to kind of spend time on my longboard and just skate along the beach, and I do that in times where I am, maybe times where it's just part of my toolbox for dopamine. I've had a long day and it's just really, and therefore, and because I know that we talk about this principle of unconditional permission to eat whatever we want, and that's the foundation of everything when it comes to nutrition. And because I know that it's just the signal, okay, well, how else do I meet that need? And if we are talking about this, then we just focus in on the red button, or like, you can't press the red button. So that's all that I see. Whereas actually, if I just see the red button as part of a range of activities that I can engage in, what do I actually want to engage in? What looks fun? And it's the same with, I can't have that chocolate. So all I just see is chocolate. Whereas if I am in a place where I just see chocolate, I see the rest of my cupboard too. And I don't know, and like, reinforcing it in a real life example, when I'm sure many other people had the similar experience. Like, when I was learning to drive, and like my first lessons, I was like, don't hit the car, don't hit the car, don't hit the car. And naturally, I then veered closer to the car. My driving instructor just reached over and go, oh, you're a bit too close there. Because my spatial awareness was skewed by don't hit the car. And my then focus on purely the car as opposed to seeing the road ahead. And we have all of these mechanisms, like our reticular activating system, which is there to see these things, to validate our beliefs. And if we just play into the hands of these literal physiological things by these ideas of should and shouldn't. And so when we talk about things like sugar, and again, understand that it's a signal for something more. Diversify your toolbox. Sugar is a way of doing it. And it's the same way that if every time you want a fix and you are masturbating every time you want to fix, it's probably not the healthiest thing to do. Like, let's diversify your toolbox here. And so it's the same thing. Like, if if we're thinking about these kind of ideas of sugar and it's your only tool, then just diversify. And who are you to deny yourself? Why would you deny yourself of something positive? But then we can facilitate positivity in a plethora of different ways.
Yeah, because it's, and I'm thinking of the fear that comes up for me is like, but if I have the sweets, if I have the Haribo and I have them in the house, then I'm going to always, and this is a projected fear because I'm assuming what I'm going to do is if they're there, I won't be able to control myself from not eating the whole packet all the time.
You will. And like, it's the sense of like, okay, then we practice. Then we say, okay, like how are we engaging in this? First and foremost, like often when we reach for these foods, we're in a state of fear. We're like, I can't eat these. And so if I do eat them and I'm having that reinforced belief, it's like, go, 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 before I give myself my brain time to compute what I'm actually doing. Whereas being like, yeah, like take yourself out of that state of fear, slow down and being like, okay, I'm going to take these and I'm going to look at what an appropriate portion is for maybe my needs right now. And then also acknowledging that sense of safety. So a big driver of eating can be, particularly from a more disordered point of view, is a lack of congruency within our signaling. I know, like right now, I'm not hungry. Like I can feel it. My stomach feels wonderfully satisfied from my lunch. And so I am I'm completely fine. And so maybe we're aware of this, even at a subconscious level. And so maybe you're in a position where you've had a long day and you've eaten, and you sense the signal that your stomach is telling you, I'm done, I'm full. But then emotionally, I'm not ready to stop yet. Emotionally, I need more pleasure. I need more dopamine. And because there's a lack of congruency within the signals, physically, I'm good. Emotionally, I'm not good. Like that creates a state of uncertainty. And I'm like, what do I do with that? And all it comes down to is just going, no, like I'm safe in this moment. What do I want to choose to listen to here? Well, I'm going to choose to listen to, you know what, I've got some emotional needs that are unmet right now, so I need to go and meet them. And so I'm going to have a bit more. Or, you know what, no, like I'm safe and I'm good. Like I hear the signal, and understanding that it's our perception of our lack of safety that is the driver of these behaviors. And so it can then, when we talk about like finishing the bag, it's because like it's just drawing awareness to why I feel unsafe. Okay, there's just a lack of congruency here. Let's just bring ourselves, no, we're safe. There can be like emotionally, like this is amazing, but I'm okay. I'm okay. And so I can stop, and just drawing awareness, and it's putting in practices essentially to try and slow down and draw awareness to these kind of things.
I was thinking that, slowing down. I was thinking back to what you said before earlier with to not have the chocolate in hand when you're eating the chocolate. And it's really slowing down and bringing awareness to our bodies and our stomachs. And like, what are we feeling? What am I and from the multiple senses, like what am I feeling emotionally? What am I feeling in my body, in my stomach? It's I'm reminded of, I did a 10-day Vipassana a number of years ago, and after I did that, I was able to, with pinpoint accuracy, tell you when I was full. Like I could sit and go, no, I could have, I'm thinking in 2 more spoonfuls of food, I'll be full, and have 1 and 2, and then be like, yeah, I'm completely full. I can stop eating now. Because I was so in tune with how my body felt. Because I spent, the best 10 days just meditating on a cushion and just feeling my body and my breath. And it sounds like this is probably the missing link for a lot of people, is they have no concept of, am I actually full, from feeling it and stopping and having the awareness to stop and go, am I full? Or am I going to continue eating this because it's good? We just go with So when people say, oh, go with what feels good, we think emotionally feels good in that moment, not necessarily what feels good from our body point of view, from, you know, our stomach and our gut. Like, and even, you know, say if we're exercising from point of view of like our heart or whatever, but it's just like, does this feel good? Actually, no, I'm full. I don't need to eat anymore. Eating anymore would make me feel bad. And it's kind of tuning into both of those and what you're saying, and then actually being like, oh, actually, yeah, I'm full. I don't need any more food. But as you said, emotionally, there's something else that I need emotionally. Like, what is that? And actually then maybe seeking something else that's not the food to bring that joy into our lives in those moments.
Completely. And there's two things that we can really practically begin to implement. We can look at a hunger journal. So just rating yourself out of 7, how hungry am I right now? And literally keep that journal and log it. And you might get to day 1 and be like, oh, this is a 6 out of 7 in terms of hunger. And then anything maybe above a 5, like, honor it. And that's okay. But then you be prepared for the fact that probably about 3 days later, you're going to realize, oh no, this is a 6 out of 7. And just begin to then really kind of tune into that. Another real fantastic principle, like particularly when we're talking about these things like the sweets and these management of these cravings, is a principle called urge surfing. Now, urge surfing was driven from a management of alcoholism, drug abuse, and particularly urges to lash out and engage in practices of violence. And so, as you can imagine, in terms of the practices around the management of an urge for heroin versus the urge for just some chocolate, there's 2 quite differing consequences there, right? And one's a lot more damaging to the body than the other. And also in terms of intensity of the urges, because of, like I say, particularly if we're addicted to alcohol and drugs, the way in which we can engage in urge surfing is really amazing and deep. But what we can do, and what we do is apply similar principles to food. And whilst we don't necessarily need to do the whole spectrum of urge surfing like we would for drugs, what we can say is that urges manifest themselves in the same way. If you were to plot them on a graph, they initiate, they start, they rise and they rise and they rise, and then they reach their peak and then they crash. And so if you draw that line on the graph, they look like a wave, and that's what they call it, urge surfing. And so what we know, particularly when it comes to food as an example, is that urges generally last. I speak very, very generally. There is research that says some of them do go on longer, but generally about 45 minutes. And so all I would just say is, I want some chocolate. Put a timer on your phone, 45 minutes later, if that's still, because still urge is still there, honor that hunger and absolutely go for it. And then just being able to bring in practices of delayed gratification, but more so what you do by putting those parameters in of like urge surfing and hunger, they're all just strategies to reconnect yourself with your body. Like, how quickly does that urge rise? What's it like? You're having to, because you've then drawn aware to it, I want chocolate, you are probably going to have to deal with that urge getting even stronger. And we perceive that as a threat, whereas actually, no, we're okay. It would be really nice to validate that urge and just to scratch that itch, so to speak. But we can also do these things. And even through these practices around overconsumption, like many times we rob ourselves of our sovereignty. Like, oh, I can't wait 45 minutes for a piece of chocolate. You're a strong, capable human being. When did you deny yourself of this strength? When are you denying yourself of these key parts of your being that have got you to where you are today as a parent? As I'm like, you pushed a kid out of there. Like, you are strong. And then you're telling me you can't wait 30 minutes for a piece of chocolate. It's like, come on, don't rob yourself of these key traits that make you. And so really kind of reconnecting with those kind of things, I think hunger rating and urge surfing are fantastic tools to be able to do that.
Those are wonderful. Those are really incredible, because then we start to really, it's just this bringing awareness, and having this a little bit more knowledge around, the urge surfing, especially, and creating the timer. It's just like, oh, I want this thing. Do I really want this thing? Is it just this kind of reactivity that I'm feeling to an emotion, or to usually to an emotion, right? A reactivity that, but if I bring some awareness, some space between me and the thing, we start to give ourselves some room to, we might, like you said, feel the urge some more, but we also get this in that space going, well, actually, do I really want that? Like, do I want something else? Like, why? We might start going, why do I want that thing? We give ourselves a space instead of being in the reactivity of it, of just like grabbing at it. And it's interesting you used the analogy of scratch the itch. I always get them the wrong way around.
Yeah, I had to think about it as well.
Scratch the itch, because I was talking to the men in my group at the moment, and we're talking about meditation. I was talking about reactivity and stillness. And I said, our awareness gets stolen by things constantly. And I was like, when you've got an itch, you don't need to scratch it. I was like, learn to not scratch your itches. And one of the guys goes, what do you mean? And I said, because if you just leave it, even if you bring all your awareness to that itch, it will go away. After even, like I've, my own personal experience in meditation is only a few minutes as it ever lasted, but it'll go away. And you realize I didn't need to do anything with that. I have a habit, it's a habitual pattern of scratching the itch. But if I bring some awareness and consciousness to it, and I just be with it, be present to it, it actually disappears into nothing. And just by doing that action, that process, you build a level of discipline and awareness, and just, building your own sovereignty, as you were saying there. It's like you realize that, oh, I have sovereignty. This thing doesn't have control over me. I have control over the thing. But I just need to put I feel like I must have read this recently. I've seen it's like the shining light of awareness onto the thing, instead of allowing it to operate in the shadows and just reactively happening constantly, and then being upset about it afterwards, or being whatever the end result. Actually, to put real attention on, okay, so I get this urge for Haribo. Okay, I can go and buy the Haribo, but I'm going to leave the packet there on the side for 45 minutes. And if in 45 minutes I still want the Haribo, then I can open the packet. I can go for it. But let me just be present with the urge that's there, and see if it's still present and still there for me, and just have that space. It's almost like a meditation. It feels like that 45 minutes, to just be with what you're feeling, what your urge is, and even to write about it. I can imagine in those moments could be really powerful.
Completely. And one of the reasons why I love meditation is exactly that. It shows you your ability to ride your urges, like particularly if you place constraints on the ideas of not scratching an itch, or even just being completely still within your body, like not even a shift of your fingers. And and then you can just notice. And what do you need to do, like within those moments? So if you want to go distract yourself during that time, okay, that's okay. But just notice. And again, thinking about, who are we to demonize distraction? Like at times it's appropriate, right? But then if that's your only tool, then okay, let's think about that. So if you're always going to distraction, notice that. And just to get, like you say, bringing awareness to these things that operate in the darkness, and being prepared to hold a mirror up to them, and take ownership of these things, because a big part of particularly our relationship with food is driven from huge elements of our, as we've kind of loosely touched on, like our modeling processes and beliefs that are formed through certainly pre-25. And so it then begs the question, or poses the question, well, whose fault is it? It's certainly not yours. And so if we are experiencing these kind of ideas of, okay, I really struggle with this, or really struggle with this, then it's not your fault. It's really, really not. And I don't say that as some kind of airy-fairy woo-woo statement. No, like genuinely, it's not your fault. You have no control over the way in which you interpret the world at 6 years old and all of these kind of things, but it's your responsibility to deal with it. And so it's not a bad thing holding this mirror up to yourself and being like, oh, I distracted myself there. Cool. Well done. Like, you rode the urge. Okay, but let's think about diversifying that next time. And riding the meditation wave of engaging in not scratching is a fantastic tool to show yourself, give yourself evidence of your sovereignty, so to speak.
It's amazing that so many things has come back to awareness. It does kind of blow my mind. It's like so many of our dysfunctions and things that cause us distress just come back to, can we bring awareness to what is causing this thing, and how deep are we willing to go to really get to what it is and be with that thing, because we can't always change it, and often it's something is unchangeable to a certain degree. Some of our beliefs that we hold about ourselves, I don't believe they're really changeable. A lot of us feel that we're not good enough, or there's something defective about us, and sometimes that belief will stay with you for the rest of your life. It just may affect you less because you're able to just be with it when it occurs and comes up, and not react to it, not scratch that itch.
Completely. And like I say, if we can just focus on what we said at the beginning, like, what are we tolerating here? What are we, whether it's the certain narratives that we believe about ourselves through to certain, like, just practice around food. I don't trust myself to keep these food. I feel guilty after eating this, and all the rest of it. Like, we don't have to tolerate that. And so if we just hold a greater light on all of these things, then it really puts us in that state of empowerment.
Thank you. I'm gonna go out today and buy a load of chocolate and Haribo and keep them in the house and retrain myself. I can really see the power in that, and like retraining, so that it's just like I'm chill with the Haribo and the chocolate and the...
Let me know how you get on.
and the biscuits.
Yeah.
Because it's better than having this tug of war relationship. So thank you, man. I've learned so much, which is awesome, which I'm so happy about. I'm going to pass that on to my partner, so she also learns about the food, because we're both guilty of the same, just not have it in the house until Friday night. But I'm sure the listeners are also thinking like, wow, I've learned so much about food, and I want to know more. I want to learn more about how I can shift my relationship with food. So how can the listeners find you? How can they work with you? How can they find your podcast as well?
Yeah, sure. So I hang out on most social media platforms. My name is Calum Stronach, but Calum spelt with one L, and Stronach spelled Stronach. And I work in a whole bunch of different capacities. I work one-to-one with people still, and I even just have a kind of a relationship with food course, which is just an 8-week kind of process that runs through these principles around, okay, what are habits that we should be promoting, through to just the impact of things like our modeling process in our childhood and how these develops our relationship with food. And I also am the host of the Not All Men podcast, where we look to basically unpick the Not All Men hashtag and kind of discuss how we can create, in a very, very similar way, a healthier framework for us men to appreciate kind of a whole bunch of other different frameworks around how we can operate healthier in a more healthy way.
Yes, wonderful. And I can, I'm lucky enough to be a guest on Calum's podcast. We had a wonderful conversation. I've listened to this. You have some wonderful guests, people I've enjoyed speaking to. Had the pleasure of speaking to myself. So I highly recommend you head over there, because, the truth is, when it comes to men, unpicking how we operate, and we've come to this, defensive nature of not all men, is incredibly, incredibly important for all of us, even if it's not something you would say to yourself or say, yourself to somebody, there's someone you know that's probably going to use that that defensive term as well. But yeah, thank you so much, Calum. Thank you for the work. Thank you for teaching us so much today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
No, it's been a joy. I'm really grateful.
Awesome. Well, listeners, that is enough from us today. I will be back next week with another episode. But until then, ciao, ciao.